So the thing with schools is that they teach you specifically how to do a certain job. For example, let's take a barber. If you want to become a barber, you have to learn how to cut hair. So you have to go to school and consciously learn how does this work, what's the theory behind it, and then do it a couple of times and learn that way, right? But the thing with language is that language is a tool, and you use the tool to communicate with other people. And communicating with other people is not really a job, I guess. I mean, of course, communication is something that is required when you do a job, and when it comes to learning a language, we know what the best way is, because you speak your native language, I speak my native language, and the way we learn this is very different than actually going to school, because when we went to school, we already knew how to speak this language, because the way we learned it is through natural acquisition of the language, not going to school. And I think this is a very interesting topic, and I actually discussed this in my previous video, I think. So I will link that video in here as well, and you can check that out if you want. So in this video, I want to share with you why I think you don't necessarily need to go to school or study by yourself, and what you should be doing instead. Also, I want to give you some examples of how I, for example, learned English this way. So why do we go to school? Well, we go to school to learn things, right? But the thing is that we don't learn language, at least not the way that we traditionally teach languages. When you were a child, you did not learn the language consciously, you did not study the grammar, because you were focused on other things. For example, your mind was just focused on learning how to eat, how to walk, how to talk maybe a little bit, but you were mainly just focused on the world around you, and you were observing things, you were listening to everyone around you using the language. For example, when your mom told you, hey, come over here, come, or here, eat this, you would understand the message and she would use the language, and therefore you made a connection. So, okay, so if she says this, that means that that I should be doing this. You heard the language and then you understood the message, and that is the important thing. And the problem is that when we go to school, we overlook this most powerful and efficient way that we acquire the language, which is, in my own words, repeatedly letting your subconscious brain understand messages in order to reach a goal. And now what school does is they consciously make you learn something which takes effort, and there's no context, or maybe little context, when they provide example sentences. But that's really it. So somehow you have to find a way to get someone to talk to you in the language that you're learning for hundreds of hours. It takes a lot of time before you actually start understanding the language, and then speaking it takes even longer. You have to understand as many messages as possible using inputs and that you understand. So we call this comprehensible input, and usually the best way to measure this is through hours. Let's say you have 2 hours of input. Of course you don't understand all of it, but I think obviously it's even more effective when it's 2 hours that you actually understand the content of. So that's why it's so important to understand the message, because if you don't understand what you are hearing, then obviously you are not really learning anything. Now, I don't personally have experience with this approach, but it is just so fascinating to me, and I really want to try this out. So try and find somebody who is willing to teach me, or not teach me, or we can just go over simple things, and then I'll try to, after, I don't know, a few months, I'm willing to go to the country even and do the same thing over and over until I get so many hours of that language into my brain, and hopefully eventually it'll work. Because for me it is really hard to understand that how can you learn a language without learning about it, like the grammar and all those things. And it's really hard to imagine, but at the same time it's obviously how I learned my first language, so it has to be true, but I just need to make sure for some reason. So I really want to try this, and if I do, then I will obviously record all of it and show it to you as well, because I think it would be really valuable. Now, sometimes going to school to actually learn the language is not really wrong, because let's take becoming a translator, for example. If you have to translate for a living, which when you are studying to become a translator, obviously you have to learn the language and you have to translate things, and therefore you have to know which things are correct and which things in the language are incorrect. And in this case, it is important to know about the language and to actively study the language. But then again, just imagine if you were native in this language through immersion and acquisition, and then became a translator. I don't know anyone who has done translating who's a native speaker versus somebody who consciously learned the language, or somebody who acquired the language and then became a translator. But that would also be really interesting to see what those differences are. Now, something that I think is really important and that most people, like 90%, don't know, is that language learning is not a goal. For example, 2023 has just started and people are probably setting goals for learning languages. So for example, I want to be able to learn French because I am going to France in a few months, or I want to learn Chinese because I want to play this game in Chinese. Or I want to learn Japanese because I want to watch anime in Japanese, for example. Goal, the language is not really the goal, because the actual goal that you are trying to achieve or to reach is watching the anime or playing the game or going to friends. And that's also why you might be not motivated after a while of studying, because why are you studying a language? You really have to find your motivation for learning. So let's go back to babies again, because for some reason it's just so fun to look at that baby and just see their expression on their face. They're just, staring at you like this, and just their goal is, like I said before, it's, I don't know, trying to eat something or trying to play or just doing some things, and then through that they are getting some input, some comprehensible input, language, and then they acquire the language, right? People like me, I like languages in general. And the thing is that when I hear a language for the first time, obviously I get interested in the language, but then it's just because it's novelty, it's a foreign language, I haven't heard it before, so I get interested. And if I actually decide to learn the language, I need to find a better motivator to learn the language. For example, have you ever seen these videos on YouTube where people just go to strangers, or they go on Omegle, or they do pranks? There's a few channels that come up in mind There's one thing that they have in common, and that is, first of all, they have a million views always. Like, there's so many views on these videos. People really love them. All of these videos have some kind of social interaction in them. And that means that this is the true reason why we learn a language. Because, like I said before at the beginning, language is a tool to communicate with other people, because we love social interaction. We like meeting people, we like interacting with them, and it's very simple, but this is a really good motivator to study languages. Now the problem is, what if you're not particularly good at social interaction, and therefore you get in this negative spiral and you just suck at social interaction and all those things? And I think this is a huge problem, and actually I want to cover that on this channel as well. So yeah, I'll keep that in mind, and definitely we'll be talking about that in other videos as well. But for now, just remember that language is a tool to communicate with other people. And therefore, it doesn't really matter if your grammar is perfect or not. What matters is that this other person understands your message and you understand their message. And if you have this connection, then everyone's happy. Now let's look at one of the most important languages in the world, English. And now how I learned English, because obviously I'm speaking in English right now, and that's the thing. I've never really learned English. Of course, I've been to school and I had to learn English, but I don't really count those things, because when I went to school to learn English, I already knew how to use English pretty well. My PC is in English, my phone is in English, I read books in English, I do basically everything in English, and then when I have to find something online or need to look something up, I do it in English. And honestly, I'm not even aware of it, and that's really important too, because like I said before, subconscious learning, this acquiring, is so powerful and so efficient. So if you're not even aware of it, you learn so many things, even through reading. When you read, so many studies have been done that say that reading is so good for language development. For example, when I was young, I loved to play games, and I still do, honestly. But also, most games I played in English, and if I didn't know what to do in the game, then I would go online and I would look it up, and then I would know what to do. And this way I learned English as well. Even though at that point I had no idea that I was learning English, I was just focused on the goal, which was completing the game, or I don't know, doing a quest or finding something in the game. And I had to use English. I basically forced myself to use English, and then I reached my goal. And the result is that, you acquire this English without even realizing it. So that's basically how I acquired/learned English, I guess. And I'm just so curious if this would work with another language as well, because that would be honestly amazing. And it would be like a revolution, a language learning revolution. I mean, just think about it. Everyone, literally everyone, goes and buys books online or goes to Duolingo, and those are all so focused on learning something and remembering it. But if this thing really works, then that would be just I don't know. So yeah, anyway, until I have done something like that, I'll let you know. And thanks for watching this video though. I'll see you in another one. Bye bye.